It's a day after the Democracy Day. Welcome to Sunrise Daily. I'm Neo Taigbe.
Yes, indeed it is. Good morning and welcome to the program. I am Bukola Koka.
Today is June 13. Yes, Democracy Day was June 12, just for those who don't know. And it's the day also after the president signed one of those critical laws into bills into law. My name is Ayo Makinde. Good morning and welcome. And that law we're talking about is what is now known as the Students' Loan Act or law, whatever it is that we want to call it. And it's very, very interesting because it's not the first time we're hearing of it. Why now is a question a number of people will be asking. And the first we ever heard of it was sometime in 1972 when the federal government at the time, under the military, came up with such an initiative. What happened to it? I guess we'll find out in days to come. And then, of course, I think it was in 1993 as well, we had something similar. But I don't know if there was ever an education bank, as is being suggested by this new law, that the federal government will come up with what they call a Nigerian education bank. And, of course, more information will come about it in days to come. Who is eligible? How will it go? How will it play out? Who are the people that can take the loan? Under what circumstances? You need to find out, especially as students, whether or not you are qualified. By the way, just so you know, it's primarily for those who are seeking higher education. The concern I have, though, guys, is how will we ensure that it doesn't go in the same way of the People's Bank of the 90s, when the federal government at the time came up with a bank to help the needy and less privileged. For this one, if you have anyone, you are a student earning anything close to anything from 500,000 naira, you are not eligible. If you have a sponsor who is earning up to that, you're not eligible, so it has to be lower than that. But then, how do we ensure that the loan is not just what some people will call my share of the national cake, so that other people can benefit from the same loans over time? Of course, the resources for it is coming from various agencies of government. FIRS is going to be contributing, oil companies are going to be contributing, and all of that. But how do we ensure that this is sustained? It's, for me, starting an initiative, amazing idea. Sustaining it, very, very, very important.
Difficult. And just to answer your question, perhaps, it's contained in one of the things that you need to know about this loan, which is applicants will go through screening to determine whether they meet the requirements for the loan, and students in all the higher institutions are eligible for this loan. So let's just hope that, political cronies do not now dominate the process by, slotting in preferred names, just as we hear about tertiary institutions in this country, that very highly placed persons have their own slot in federal universities. But just to talk a bit about the benefits of this loan, Ayo, perhaps we should give a bit of a background. I recall during the administration of former Governor of Lagos State, Babatunde Fashola, because of the emerging realities of funding tertiary education at the time, of sustaining tertiary education administrative-wise, remuneration for lecturers, there was an increase in school fees for students. But the downside to that policy was that it reduced the number of applicants into that public institution by thousands. I recall interacting with one of the lecturers in that institution, and we've seen that also play out in many state universities across the country, how state governors have had to increase the school fees for students in tertiary education, in tertiary institutions, and how students have gone to the streets to protest, because a lot of these students are funded by their parents who have no other means of livelihood, perhaps than petty trading, whose parents perhaps are working in public institutions where they earn meager salaries. But then again, you'll also find that lawmakers recognize this challenge of funding education, and then you see that in their constituency projects, what dominates it is payment of WAEC fees, payment of JAM fees. So perhaps this intervention is very laudable to bridge that funding gap.
Yeah.
But as Ayo said, what's critical is that, this process is not abused such that those who really need these funds, are eased out of the process, are unable to access it.
Well, perhaps just to say, first of all, it's an applaudable idea. It's something that is applauded. The sponsor of the bill, incidentally, happens to be the now former Speaker of the House
and
of
Chief of Staff. Just to add that, maybe that's what made it sail through so quickly.
He actually started the process since like 2016, but of course it didn't see the light of day in the 8th Assembly at the time. But quick information is that the loan is tuition for higher learning, and they're eligible. Students seeking tuition for higher learning, tuition fees for higher learning are eligible. It's going to be disbursed through an education bank charged with that responsibility. Your academic records will be monitored, so it's not just get money and go to sleep.
So your GP will be monitored.
So employers of loan beneficiaries will deduct loan from their salary after NYSC, and the fund of the bank shall consist of 1% of tax levies from FIRS, NIS, and 1% of oil profits. So that's, just imagine 1% of 1 billion. That's a lot of money. So it's a brilliant and unprecedented move, very, very applaudable. But let's just ensure that there is some instruments put in place to ensure its sustainability. Nyata.
Fantastic move, beautiful law, and it will indeed help the education sector and help a lot of Nigerians who are seeking to gain a higher education and they are not able to afford it. You asked a question earlier about if such a bank had existed before. There is actually a Nigerian, hold on there, let me just get that exactly as it is, a Nigerian Education Bank Act of 2003. That act was signed into, or that bill was signed into law in 2003, the Nigerian Education Bank. So maybe there will be a harmonization of the two laws, or is this an amendment of the 2003 law, the Education Bank? Because with this loan law now, this loan act that has been signed, there's going to be an establishment of an education bank. That's what he says. So are they going back to the old act, the education bank that was established before? Or would there be a new education bank? All of those things, as you said earlier, Ayo, are things that will be worked out in the course of the days as they done. But it's a good thing that has happened, and nobody has an excuse anymore to say, I can't afford to go to school. My parents can't afford to send me to school. Here is your opportunity. The government is looking to see that you do go to school. But we will take a moment, and when we return, we'll look at what the papers have to say about all that's happening. Starting out with the look at the papers with the Guardian newspaper, and this is what it leads with. Lawmakers edgy in last-minute battle for Senate leadership. That story is on page 6. Yeah, you see there. They're edgy in last-minute battle for Senate leadership. Details you find on page 6. Really wonder, if you look at the picture there, of course, the National Assembly building, behind the picture of the president, and then the chessboard in front of him. What's going on here? Is it a chess game? Who's going to go where? What's going to happen? But we'll see all of that unveiled today as the 10th Assembly is inaugurated in a few minutes from now, actually. Above that, you have 52% of Nigerian professionals considering migration, as according to a survey. You check page 7 to see who conducted the survey, how far and how wide was that survey, and how true is this. But if you do speak to a lot of Nigerians, a lot of young Nigerians, and even some of the elderly, if you speak to them, they'll tell you how much they would want to go somewhere else, to try out some other things. And beside that story, you have indigent students to access education loans. Yes, we talked about that earlier. It's on page 4. you could be the one that's qualified. You go apply for it in the next few weeks, I guess. Heavy rains leave Lagos roads in shambles. That's on Metro page 12. If you see that picture there of the roads that are failing, Lagos state government to the rescue. About 500 billion naira lost to anchor borrowers program is on page 6, news page 6. How could Nigeria have lost 500 billion naira to anchor borrowers program? Is it that they were not paying back the loans they borrowed? And that's it from The Guardian here. Ayo, Buki.
Yes, indeed, Nyota. From The Guardian, let's take a quick look at Leadership newspaper. Leadership newspaper also leads with the big event of today, and this is how it is captioned. Anxiety as 10th NASS elects presiding officers today. Take a look at the riders. Akpabio, Yari in last push for Senate presidency. Wase, Jaji, Onoha still in speakership race. That's interesting. Abbas Kalu's support base swells to 290 members. Well, the opposition also says we have our own support base. Let's see what happens today, of course. The conversation also holds a lot of promise later on the program. But take a look at this one right beside the big story. My advocacy for power balancing twisted. Well, if you find it in other mediums, the complete statement is twisted by agents of division. And it's the vice president speaking here. Find all the details where he spoke if you take a look at page 12 of Leadership newspaper. And this one right under that story of the vice president is equally important. Parents beg for release of 92 Chibok girls. It's been how many years counting now, Ayo?
Quite some, since 2014.
9 years counting, and quite a number of girls are still in captivity, and those also kidnapped that are unaccounted for. Perhaps, the administration can, take more decisive steps to ensure that those girls are released and reunited with their parents. And lastly, before we exit Leadership newspaper, you'll find this one as well. Gunmen kill one, kidnap 2 monarchs in Bauchi. Let's leave it there for Leadership newspaper.
It's D-Day. That's the way this Nigerian newspaper opens the story this morning. That's the lead story of this Nigerian newspaper. NASS, it's D-Day. And look at the riders. Akpabio, Yari is also set for showdown over Senate presidency. Wike, Makinde, other governors storm Abuja, mobilized for Akpabio. Abbas Kalu most likely to emerge House Speaker and Deputy. The details you'll find on page 2 of the paper this morning. Well, right beside the nameplate, you lied. Air Peace replies Sirica over claim of losing $19 million. That's about the leased aircraft. Find the details on page 20 of the paper this morning. Right under the picture you see on the front page, that collage of pictures. Chibok girls, parents beg Tinubu to facilitate release of 92 girls still in captivity. That story is on page 6 of the paper this morning, and several others you'll find interesting. That's this Nigerian newspaper today.
Abuja Inquirer is what I have here, and they have something else they're leading with. Gunman shoot U.S. Embassy official in Abuja. That's what Abuja Inquirer is leading with. Embassies heightened security. So in the midst of all the politicking going on, there's still that bit about security there. So that story continues on page 3. And then you see a picture there of the president meeting some governors from the opposition parties, Labour Party, PDP, there represented. And above that, you see another picture of the Cross River State governor and his earliest appointments. They call them the governor's men. But above that nameplate, you have the big story again. Nigeria Air. How Rep asked for 5% bribe. That's coming from the former minister. It continues on page 3. Of course, you do know that the lawmaker also reacted as well. That's it from the Abuja Inquirer.
And from there, let's turn to Daily Trust newspaper. Daily Trust also leads with the big event of today, and this is how it's captioned: Akpabio, Yari, Abbas, Wasi slug it out today. 4 presiding officers to emerge. That's the first of the riders. Of course, we know that the Senate President, Deputy Senate President, Speaker, and Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives. 469 lawmakers to vote, and security has been beefed up, of course, for obvious reasons. Those offices are keenly contested. Take a look at some more stories under that. But by the way, you can't mistake the pictures of the officers vying for elective positions. You know, on the floor, you have there the man vying for the office of the Senate President, Senator Godswill Akpabio. You have Senator Yari, you have Idris Wasi, and of course, the party's nominated man for the office of Speaker, Honorable Tajuddin Abbas. And right under that, right beside those ones, there's a story trail. Tinubu signed student loan bill into law. 21 killed in fresh Plateau attack. Bandits slaughter chickens, prepare food during attacks on Niger villagers. That's interesting. Ayo.
All right, the Vanguard newspaper this morning has this one on its front page. Of course, it's also looking at the inauguration of the National Assembly today. And inauguration, power show as 10th National Assembly gets underway. Stories on page 5, and a host of riders right there on the front page. You find details on the inside pages. That story about student loans is also right there. The president appending his signature. There is a call to action, so to speak, by the NBA. Subsidy, Nigerians groaning. NBA tells Tinubu, most certainly something as concerning. Look right above the nameplate. You'll find this interesting. But before I get to that one, petrol marketers struggle to raise capital for new supplies. I mean, there are those who would say we saw this coming. Who will come to the rescue? I guess we'll wait to see. And June 12, Abiola was forerunner to entrench democracy tenet in Nigeria. That's according to Kingibe, who was his vice presidential candidate at the time. Anthrax. Stop eating momo, bushmeat. FG tells Nigerians. Now, who is going to listen to that advice?
Certainly not Ayo.
I don't know about Ayo, but you know, there is this on the lighter side. There is this comedian forever who says he's the president of the Republic of Momo Republic. So I'm not sure that he's really interested in that story. But it's something to give some measure of attention to. It's not new. We've been talking about it for a while.
For some time.
And it's not just in Nigeria, from what I found out about it earlier on. So,
well, there are different categories of momo. Can we at least eat white momo? Because there are some of us.
Oh, now you are coming out of your closet. Because there are some people who cannot drink certain drinks without the spicy ones, whether it's white or brown or whatever it is. But that's what the federal government is saying. What are the circumstances? You want to find out the story, the details of the story on page 8. Wow, stop eating pomo. Very interesting. And right beside that one, June 12, INEC APC dishonored Abiola's memories as PDP. But look at this one. No witch hunt in cancelling employment of 12,000 civil servants. 12,000 civil servants. That's according to Governor Ali, I believe, of Benue State. Well, the details you find on page 13 of the paper.
As a
Mr. and Mrs.
economic reality there.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
Mr. and Mrs. has this one. So Mr. says, oh, so because I don't know how to knot ties, you called me a bushman. You have to respect your husband. A bird in hand is better than 1,000 in the bush. Mrs. Standing Akimbo says, you see, only a bushman knows what happens in the bush. As the Vanguard newspaper this morning.
Of course, who else do you expect to know what happens in the bush if not a bushman? It has to be someone who's there that will know what's there. But that matter of the Bomo I don't know. You need to go back to the elders in the village, Ayo, and ask them what to do about that. But let's move on and look at what the New Telegraph has to say here. And that you see the picture there of the two front runners for the seat of the Senate office of the Senate president, and winning team to renew the hope of Nigerians. Well, you see the president and the vice, and below, which of these two? Well, who knows? But then above that nameplate, and that's an advert anyway, but that above that nameplate is high wire politicking as members elect leaders. That's above the nameplate. Senators, reps in last minute log rolling. Again, Northern elders warn against imposition. PDP debunks reports of NASS minority leadership stance. You check page 2, 3, 9, 10, 11, and 27 for more details on that story about the 10th NASS. It's going to be a report reaching us have so far that even as we speak, the gates are not open to any vehicles, so most of the lawmakers are having to walk into the National Assembly complex for security reasons, I guess. Beside that one, you have revealed how Nigeria lost over $56 billion to oil theft subsidy. Check page 2 and 8 for details. We'll see the riders. $70 billion investment lost in petroleum industry. Subsidy. Marketers can't restock. Shut fuel stations. Okay, so the question then will be, what some of those fuel stations, some of them have fuel, but they are shutting down, maybe because they are not able to sell at the prices they want to sell. But that's the story there. Check page 2 and 8 for more details. Tinubu signed students' loan bill into law is on page 4. Family begs FG. Pay MKO Abiola's presidential entitlement. Well, I guess conversations will still continue around that request by the Abiola family. Check page 2, 4, and 6 for details. And then this one about export. Nigeria's export within Africa dips by 29.3% to 665.9 billion naira. After that's first quarter of 2023. You check page 3 for more details on that. And that's it from New Telegraph.
And very quickly, let's take a look at the Nigerian News Direct. And Nigerian News Direct chooses to lead with something entirely different apart from what's happening at the National Assembly today. And it's on our conversation, what we started off with. FG approves interest-free loans for Nigerian students. Way forward to end tuition fee crisis. That's ascribed to NANS Zone D. Of course, the news director is already on the road for reactions to that. And stakeholders advocate complete refund 2 years after NYSC. I'll take that again. Stakeholders advocate complete refund 2 years after NYSC. Well, if you're interested in details, just to be clear about what that exactly means, you'll find details on page 3 of the Nigerian News Direct. There are quite a number of important stories above the nameplate. Terrorists abduct Catholic priest in Kaduna. And, just before this, it was a leadership newspaper. Now, on another paper, we saw stories about abductions and, in fact, the attackers having time to cook during the attack in Niger State. The scrutiny is on the security forces, particularly since the president has issued order that he will not tolerate any form of lapses and that, service chiefs must share information. Already we're seeing, their approach to tackling insecurity with these continuing attacks.
For me, I think, at the end of the day, what is important is the ownership by Nigerians as well, because, hey, you see, the level of poverty is such that people would almost sell their souls for just about anything. And I think, there are those who say, okay, maybe the president is on the right track, taking some of the issues that are being taken head on now. But if the people have loose cash, they have access to make some living, significant living for themselves. So, okay, the president has promised a living wage. I guess that's also subject of interpretation. But, you know, if people can earn living wages by themselves, whatever it is that you do in the nation, you earn a day's pay that can actually take you home. I think, you know, all of these issues of insecurity would be significantly reduced, and people can go to their eyes to bed with their two eyes closed, which is one of the.
I guess that's a good reference to, you know, the kinetic approach to tackling insecurity, other than using arms and ammunition. But right under that perhaps it's a follow-up to the discussion. I will repay your sacrifice with quality governance. Quality governance is tackling the insecurity issues in the land. And lastly, from the Nigerian News Direct, also from Democracy Day, Governor Abiodun promises to preserve memory of late MKO Abiola with good governance. And of course, you know, we'll keep our eyes on that to ensure some form of accountability.
Absolutely.
Let's leave it there for the Nigerian News Direct.
And that's where we also leave it for the papers this morning. We're back right after now to take on the issues for the day, principal among which is the National Assembly leadership. Stay with us.
There's a time for new beginnings and a time for endings. And after 4 years, the end has come for the 9th Senate. Before bidding goodbye, the Senate holds a valedictory session to commemorate the end of the 9th Assembly. Lawmakers trickle into the Senate chamber, ready for the session to begin. The upper chamber suspends its rules to allow members who have moved to the executive arm access the chamber. The Senate clerk presents the certificate of legislative service to the Senate President, Senator Ahmed Lawan, and the Deputy Senate President, Senator Ovie Omagigi. The Senate President then issues the certificate of legislative service to his colleagues.
Senator Obinna Joseph Ogwa, please.
The floor is open for remarks by senators. Some of them are emotional as they recount their experiences in the last 4 years.
I went through one of my best time in life in the Senate, and also went through one of my difficult period. Also in this Senate. Before I came to the Senate, before I came into politics, I can buy anything body can buy. I'm not a thief. Those that put me in prison, no treason, they put me in prison. They took over all my businesses and want to kill me. But I survived it. I'm in the Senate with you people.
Since I've joined this National Assembly, it is always time for us to come and say goodbye to people that you don't want to part with. Yes, we have done all we could. We have cooperated that much, but can we say we have succeeded when 75% of us are not coming back?
It's also an avenue for the legislators to offer words of advice to the incoming lawmakers.
We have to make the necessary sacrifice, which starts with the new 10th Assembly.
And so I will urge the government and the 10th Senate to look at the issues of the political and administrative structure for the people of the FCT.
So, Mr. President, for the incoming Senate, please, and you will be the special advisor to that particular Senate, special advisor extraordinary. Once a motion is taken on the floor of the Senate, and that motion is also taken in the House of Reps or vice versa, and if the agreement is the same, then the executive must be compelled to adhere, to give effect to that particular motion and the prayers therein.
The issue of the Gender and Equal Opportunities Bill, I want to request that the government makes it an executive bill so that no senator and no member of the National Assembly will be able to have a dissenting voice.
The President of the Senate makes his final speech.
A healthy and constructive relationship between the executive and the legislative arms promotes stability and continuity in governance. By working together these past 4 years, we have positively addressed pressing national issues, resolved conflicts, and maintained political stability, which is crucial for economic growth, social development, and improved public trust in the government.
The Senate President becomes emotional at the response of his colleagues.
Thank you. God bless you. The Senate is adjourned sine die.
The curtain finally closes for the 9th Senate. Channels Television News.
Thank you. Welcome back. So we're looking at that thing. What is happening in the National Assembly? The 10th Assembly is to be inaugurated today. And before today, there's been that build-up to this day. Who's going to occupy which seat? How is it going to work out? The back and forth, the lobbying here and there. And at the end of the day, is to produce a National Assembly that will work for the people. Now, there's something else that ahead of this inauguration, there was an alteration to the Constitution, the 5th alteration, number 8, 2023, which altered section 54, 96, and 311 of the Constitution to stipulate a quorum of at least 2/3 of members elect for inauguration or first sitting. Before now, that wasn't the situation. How would that affect the workings or what's going to happen today? But these are conversations we'll look at as we go into this. And we have here in our Abuja studio, immediate past National Policy Secretary of the People's Democratic Party, Mr. Kola Lobodiyan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and good morning, Nigerians.
Also here is Honorable Bimbo Daramola, a former member of the House of Representatives, 7th Assembly, right?
Yes, correct.
And a former member of the APC, and a former member of the SGP. You're quite traveled.
No, but that's not extensive enough.
It's not extensive enough.
He was also Bimbo was also in PDP. No, I wasn't in PDP. I was in PDP by association.
By association. Okay. Good to have you gentlemen here. So we're supposed to have a third guest who was a former chairman of the House of Reps and Senate Committees on Rules and Business, but we're hoping he can make it before the conversation ends today. So let's start out here. Mr. Daramola, let's start with you. I mean, all that has happened to the build-up. Mm-hmm. I mean, you were in the 7th Assembly.
Right.
Now,
the most dramatic of them.
The most dramatic. But was it as dramatic in terms of selecting a leadership or electing a leadership as this 10th Assembly has been?
Well, at another forum, I had reasons to say this. Every one time we get to this point of electing the leaders of the National Assembly, we get into this frenzy just happens, okay? And it's unfortunate. Only yesterday we were talking about Democracy Day. And then people were, congratulating themselves and saying all kinds of niceties about democracy and all of those things. But let me make it clear to you that dissension or opposition is to democracy what friction is to movement. If there's no friction, you cannot have movement. Now, the nexus between what I've said and what you see, the frenzy that is in the air today about who imagines, what you call the build-up and all of those things, is the fact that our democracy has not matured in process and in principles or in full compliance with the principles to the extent that we allow the natural order to prevail. You understand? Now, what democracy preaches is freedoms. All the charters are spices to democracy. And so, all of this frenzy that we see today may not have been necessary, what you call the build-up, may not have been that necessary if people had allowed, or if we get to a time in our democracy and democratic practice where we allow things to just run of their own accord. Now, you talk about the election of leaders into the National Assembly. Let me make it abundantly clear to you. There are only 469 electorates. What's the frenzy about? And the Constitution and the House rules, first and foremost, the Constitution has made it abundantly clear how leaders will emerge in both of the houses. It says that, I think it's section 50, subsection 1, that members of the National Assembly shall, and that emphasis is shall, where the law indicates shall, it means it cannot be varied, shall elect one out of themselves for themselves, okay? And what that seeks to do is to create an environment where the judgment and the discretion of the electorates, 469 of them, will be supreme. However, we may have, democracy also allows for extraneous influences. Oh, the wishes of the party, the wishes of leadership, and all of those things, But the truth of the matter is that at the end of the day, the bottom line must be a respect and total caving in to section 50, subsection 1B, where the Constitution clearly says that members of the National Assembly shall choose. Once we get to operationalize that section of the Constitution, we would not have this frenzy and the build-up that you've talked about. Some of those people, some people have cited usage of money, coercion, this and that, and inducement and all of those things. During our own time, 7th Assembly was most dramatic, I told you. But going forward, and I believe that under a president like Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who has been in opposition for the greater part of his life, okay, I believe that, and then supported by his wife, who is also a senator, and then the chairman of the party and all of those people, the national secretary, I believe that the maturity level of our democratic practice, particularly with election of leaders for the National Assembly, will get to the optimum mark where all of this frenzy and the build-up that you have cited may not be necessary.
You know, you've used the word maturity for Nigeria's democracy almost like 3 or 4 times in the course of your submission. But let me bring it to Mr. Lobodian. This matter of maturity of our democracy, weighed against what many will say is our kind of democracy, our kind of people that we are. There are those who argue that we shouldn't even be talking democracy the way the rest of the world is talking democracy, because we don't behave the same way the rest of the world behaves. I mean, there's a standard for every household, and there's a way the households behave. So how should, when we keep saying our democracy is not mature, but some of the things happening now, well, how does that play out?
Thank you very much. Once again, good morning. I guess that you asked me to describe our state of democracy, and I've been around. I've also, he knows, I covered the National Assembly as a reporter. I work as an advisor to the President of the Senate, Senator Mark, for 8 years.
The leadership of one of the biggest political parties.
I've also monitored, I've also followed situations in the National Assembly.
I can say that what is happening is like a situation you have in the salon of a barber's chair, where you have motion without progress. That's the situation. I find it strange, I find it funny that 24 years down the line, that even members of the parliament do not understand their own rules or their own law that will guide the election of leadership. It is strange that you walk around the street of Abuja and you find posters of people seeking to be Speaker of the House of Representatives, or you find you find billboards of people seeking to be Speaker of the House of Representatives. What kind of progress is that? In your own time in the 7th Assembly, were those seeking to be presiding officers posting posters in the city? Were they building billboards in the city? Like he rightly said, this election is just within the members of the House of Rep and the senators of the Federal Republic. And I think that it is very convenient, it's very easy for them to sit down and choose who will be their leaders. We've had that system for a number of time. And if you also look at it, what is happening today, you discover that the intimidation, the insults, the character assassination, the demeaning allegations against fellow members who are aspiring to lead the House is totally uncalled for. Like I've always believed and I've always said, what happened in the parliament is a reflection of what happened in the outside world. Because those who go to the parliament go there from the outside world. And it is also political, it's politics. So the debasement that we are finding today in the process of electing the presiding officers of the National Assembly is a reflection of what is happening in our political environment. So for democracy, yes, we are growing, but it's a motion without progress. Rather, we're having a situation whereby even the lessons learned in the past or from the assemblage of the past are quickly forgotten, and people are even retarding this progress. I think that's my own thing.
So when you talk about lessons learned from the past and people looking back, let's take a step back a bit and look at this 9th Assembly, Honorable Damola. They've called themselves, I mean, in that report we want to describe themselves as the most people-friendly parliament, in the sense that they passed laws, they looked at laws and bills, rather, that are very people-oriented. They will always talk about the electoral act, they'll talk about the Students' Loan Act that's just been signed, and the electricity law that has also been signed, and things that can help Nigerians get involved indeed. So how would you describe the 9th Assembly, even as we begin to look at the 10th?
Well, by natural order, you will expect that the son will achieve more than the father. You understand? So, and then the father should achieve more than the grandfather. That's the natural order. But you find situations where that order may not be applicable. But the truth of the matter is that the jury is in town. Nigerians will be in a position to fully assess what the 9th Assembly has bequeathed to Nigerians for all of the entitlements, all of the perks and perquisites of office that they've enjoyed for 4 years. I believe very strongly that there are some milestones that the 9th Assembly also have to show for the period, just like the 8th, just like the 7th. In terms of people centricity, what I would advise is for us to, in the United States, there's a body called the Congressional Watch that actually does the detailing of every assembly, how every action, everything that assembly gets to do affects an average American on the streets. They go to employment, they go to living wages, they go to infrastructure, they go to security. Is America safer now? And all of those things. And all of those things are products of enactment. You understand? But I'm afraid that we don't have that in Nigeria. So what most of us do now is a recourse to what the the lizard does when he falls from the iroko tree, nods his head and says, I've done well. You understand? I believe very strongly that some of the things that the Ninth Assembly has done will endure for a while. But I believe that that should be a gateway into the 10th Assembly. Sitting down here, I want to also give a lot of credit to what we did at the 7th Assembly. Everything that people know about fuel subsidy today came from the 7th Assembly. Everything. The origin of the busting of that bubble about fuel subsidy came from. I remember Speaker Tambua, then Speaker, now former governor, and now Senator-elect, rose from a meeting with us after attending the empowerment of a cousin of mine, Honorable Joe, and this issue of fuel subsidy started. And for the very first time in the history of Nigeria, the parliament not only sat on Sunday, but sat all the way to 8 p.m. 7th Assembly did that, and no other one has lived up to that expectation and lived up to that purpose-driven sensitivity. Not one. So it's up to the people to now judge. And guess what? Bukola Saraki, also the Speaker, also the Senate President, acted very rightly at that time also and picked up the gauntlet that led to PIB. So,
but at the end of the day, the PIB wasn't even signed.
No, it wasn't. That may not be his fault. He eventually became PIA. But you know that he went through, and that is the way of the parliament. Anyway, every bill that goes through the process and gets stuck in the process would have to be represented.
But that's what the rules. The other side, the question will be that in all that you were able to do, how much of that experience and knowledge did you bequeath to the 8th and 9th Assembly?
Thank you very much for that question. When I left the 7th Assembly, I discovered that for one of the reasons why we have not fully institutionalized the parliament is because nobody exchanges handover notes. And the turnover rate is so high, so huge. This same assembly, everybody that came in newly to that House of Reps, 80% of them did not return. And so, for all of the training that they've acquired over time, they lost them. And then hang on. And then, so I proposed, one of the things that I also proposed when I became Chief of Staff in the same National Assembly, at the 8th Assembly, was that there must be a handing over note. The same, it's an office. It is not to gratify human beings. It is not to gratify position holders. So, if the consciousness is deepened at the 10th Assembly, that every member, we go on oversight, we don't even have notes that we have taken. So, how do you put that in the hands of your successor? Where does it start from? 80% of guys who are going to be inaugurated today, by the way, congratulations, guys. 80% of them that will be inaugurated today are starting from a clean slate.
So, let me stop you there and take you to the party here. I assume that you're the party because, you're in the leadership of the party. How is it then that your members who are not returning and probably handing over to another set of your members in the same position, for instance, do not hand over notes? Is that not part of what you... It's not as per the job of the party in mandating them or instructing or directing.
It is not a responsibility of the party. What the party can do, which the PDP had done in the past, is to ensure that a large number of their sitting members return back to the parliament. Very good. But you also know that the party has no control over this because the nuances in the respective constituencies differ. Until very recently, where we were able, in my own federal constituency, where we were able to elect Honorable TJ Yusuf for 3 terms, the situation had always been one time on, one time off. One time in this local government, one time in another local government. Until the local government came to an awareness through the instrumentality of a former Deputy Chief of Staff to the Presidency, Chief Shola Akomode, that look, we cannot continue like this. If we proceed like this, we cannot have achievement as a people. And he put his feet on the ground and said, look, let TJ Yusuf go back in 2nd term. And from there, we're able to have him in the 3rd term. But you see, beyond that, I think what we should, the Nigerians should demand is that we should not shut down every bill after the life of a set of the National Assembly. That's very important. That's where we are missing the point.
Okay.
And there are also no people there. When we bring a new set, like he has said, like he said, anyway, congratulations to those who are coming in now. But like I said, close to 80%, or maybe about 70% of those who are coming in are totally new breeds. They don't even know, for them to even grasp, to have an understanding of the way Parliament works, in terms of parliamentary processes and procedure.
All right.
They will need at least 2 years.
Okay, we will take a short break, and when we come back, we'll give you an update on what's going on at the National Assembly, where the inauguration should be kicking in a few minutes. You understand, it should be starting about 8 a.m., but we'll bring you updates on that when we come back from this short break. Please stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. Just a quick update from what's going on at the National Assembly. All is set for the commencement of the inauguration at the Senate, as senators, including the Senate President, Ahmed Lawan, are in the Red Chamber ahead of the commencement, which has been changed from 10 a.m. to 8 a.m., so in about 6 minutes. That's going to happen. The time was changed last night. The Secretary to the Governor of the Federation, Mr. George Akume, is also present. The former governor of Kano State, Abdullahi Ganduje, is present as well. Now, earlier today, there was a situation at the National Assembly. The gates were locked and security heightened. Lawmakers couldn't get access to the building. There's information that the inauguration was likely to change. The timing was to change, and so all of that happened real quick. Lawmakers were seen, as you can see in that footage, coming down from their vehicles and walking into the complex. I understand that there was a bit of traffic at the gates, and so they had to come down because the gates were locked to walk in. Again, I guess that was done to ensure that those who are not meant to be there do not find themselves in that space. Okay, so let's come back to this conversation now. We've since been joined by Senator Ita Enang, former chairman, House of Reps and Senate Committee on Rules and Business, emeritus advisor to the President on National Assembly Matters, and gubernatorial aspirant APC Akwa Ibom State 2023. Senator Enang, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
You missed quite a bit of our conversation earlier, but I'm sure you were following.
Yes.
But let's start off on this one. You being a former chairman of the Rules and Ethics Committee in both the Green and Red Chamber, this portion of the Constitution recently amended to maybe give impetus to what's happening today. Section 54(1)(a) says, for the purpose of the inaugural and first sitting of the Senate or the House of Representatives, the quorum shall be at least 2/3 of all members elect of either the Senate or the House of Representatives. It's never been that way. I mean, the Constitution never had that portion, as in fixing a number for quorum. Why now?
The situation is that the Section 60 authorizes members to make rules. That is the standing orders. And there was something that happened in the 8th Assembly. And that was that, I think that was in 2015, when during the Saraki Ekweremadu inauguration. And APC, that was their first experience or incursion into governance. That was the first time APC won election.
Yeah.
And APC, most of them came from the state houses of assembly. And most of the leaders were leaders of state houses of assembly or governors who have the practice of the governor must agree as to who will be what before they all put them in a bus and write them there. And what they did was, at that time, while some people were at the International Conference Center trying to sort out the leadership, who will be the Senate President and the Speaker, a group of persons who were pre-briefed, and of course, don't forget, that was also the time the standing orders were changed, when the mode of voting was changed from open voting to secret ballot, so that you don't know where anybody votes, and of course it's still the separate situation. Now, when they went into the chambers, they were not up to 1/3, and the clerk seems to have been pre-briefed, and the clerk seems to have been tuned in, because it was the clerk that was responsible for the amendment of the rules, as it were, So, because at the time the rules were amended, we had all vacated the assembly. That is, the rules were amended after the dissolution of the House. So, the members present, when it was .10, the clerk or the knock moved in and started taking the roll call of members. Members were not up to 2/3 or 1/3. While the group of Ahmed Lawan were meeting at the International Conference Center trying to sort out the situation, the Saraki bloc had moved into the chambers, and the clerk, pre-briefed, and who is bound by the proclamation of the president.
Exactly.
Bound by the proclamation of the president. Had, at the dot of 10, according to the proclamation, moved in. And they were not up to 1/3, but he started taking the roll call. And by the time the other people got the idea, came in, there were some other issues that blocked them. In fact, I apologize, there were artificial roadblocks that were created on the route that weren't even needed to be blocked, because I think there was extra mobilization. So it was necessary for the Constitution to be amended to say that for the purpose of the inauguration, there must be at least 2/3 of the members elect present before the inauguration can commence. So I expect that will kick in today, because the clerk will ensure that although the time is in and it enters at the time of the proclamation, he must ensure that taking the rule that there are 2/3 of members present before he can start the process. That is the history of that amendment, and is to cure the mischief that was created in 2015.
You call it mischief, but you also said here that the clerk was bound by the proclamation of the president.
Yes, I said that.
So, why call it mischief when the law, the Constitution, gave them room to say any number of you can gather, so to speak, and carry on with proceedings?
And the clerk was bound again by the standing orders, as it were, because the standing orders said at least 1/3 shall form a quorum, as it were. But now, 1/3, no, but now, for the purpose of inauguration, only 2/3 under the Constitution can suffice. I think I would draw the word mischief. I think it's too, because it would have been a mischief if it was the provision then and it was not obeyed. But it is to cure and address that situation, not a mischief.
Let's see, our colleagues.
Yes, I just wanted to say something, because I heard you saying that the timing of the inauguration has been changed from 10 a.m.
As they move forward
to 8 a.m.
Yes.
That is not what is contained in the proclamation. And just like the erudite legislator has just told us on this platform, proclamation in itself is a law or a convention, because you must abide by everything that's contained.
So maybe it's possible.
If they move forward, the timing of the proclamation, that in itself is a subterfuge.
So maybe they moved the timing to give their members enough time to get in there and be 2/3. Is that possible?
To 8 a.m. from 10 a.m.
So that the process will start at 10.
It may not be the time proclaimed for the sitting, but for arrival and the pre-arrival procedures. Because a proclamation is a constitutional provision by the governor or the president.
Yes.
And the time contained in the proclamation can only be changed by another proclamation.
Which hasn't come.
I can't say.
Okay.
Because we are not in a position to see the proclamation. The proclamation is not addressed to the public. The proclamation is addressed to the clerk, to the National Assembly, and gazetted.
So it's also possible that there's been a counter-proclamation or another proclamation which we are not aware of that might have moved the time from 10 to 8. You call it strange, but we're not there. We'll get to find out as well. But hold on. My colleagues in Lagos have questions for you. Ayo.
Well, thank you, but let me quickly take that on because I was going to ask that question as well. How much power, let me ask Senator Ita Enang, how much power does the clerk of the National Assembly have in this particular situation that we find ourselves in? Because if indeed there was no re-proclamation to, if I'm allowed to use that term, and the proclamation is that the meeting should start at 10, who has the power other than the proclamation? Do you think okay, maybe let's just put it straight. How much power does the clerk of the National Assembly have, who is, one can say, the general manager of the assembly until the leadership is inaugurated?
The clerk has powers, one, as stated in the standing orders, and second, he is bound, extremely bound, and without a discretion to follow the proclamation of the president. The president is to make 2 proclamations. 1, proclamation dissolving the National Assembly, and 2, the proclamation inaugurating to proclaim the National Assembly. And that proclamation is addressed to the clerk to the National Assembly and is a public instrument. So I do not think that the clerk has any other power other than as proclaimed in the Constitution. But the question of the time of proclamation, there will be arrival and pre-arrival proceedings. But having not seen a proclamation or a proclamation, I will not want to speak more on this situation because it will amount to conjecture unless I have personally seen, read, or heard, because a proclamation is an instrument for the public knowledge, 1, but it is addressed primarily to the clerk to the National Assembly, who is the person to execute the proclamation.
Okay. Honorable Daramala, let me ask you this one. So it is the job of the clerk, so to speak, to aggregate all the members to make sure that the members elect were there as and when they're expected. I'm assuming that proclamation also states the date and time when that event should happen. But from going by the experience of what we had in 2015, when that, the adjustments that Senator Enang just spoke about, do you see a likelihood of such a thing happening again in the light of the continuous tussle that we've heard until now, Honorable Daramala?
See that happening, that's number 1, because the scenarios are very different. In fact, they are poles apart. 1, I believe that what Nelta described as the frenzy is just, it seems to have thinned down a little bit, and the highs has thawed. But let me say this to you. If I were in the parliament when this amendment was proposed, I would have gone against it. And the only reason why we can't make laws for every scenario. We can't. How can we make laws to compel people to do this? And you can. Laws are supposed to kill or prevent or prevent a scenario that has occurred that the society deems to be wrong. Now, that proclamation order expressly, there must be a reason why that time was put there. So, for the situation that we are in today, I believe that the 8 a.m. Time or something like that is just to get people to get into the chambers, and then they can start the process of maybe accreditation. The actual event for today kicks off at 10 a.m.
Depending on the proclamation or any other matter that may have arisen under the signature of the president.
I have seen a copy of that. It's in the public
It's in the public space.
Everybody has seen it.
Everybody has seen it.
Everybody has seen it.
It's in public
so,
space. And the time.
So if he says 10 a.m. and there's no situation as we speak today.
Honorable Daramala, just a second, if you can hear me.
I mean, probably warrant.
Permit me to. Pardon me. Let me just take this to you. Take you on this one, Honorable Daramala. So, to something that you said just a little while ago, we've had situations where less than 1/3 or even 1/3 or thereabouts of members of a House of Assembly elect the leadership of their assembly, and a number of things like that, of course, even in the test case of the 2015 National Assembly that we're speaking about as well. Do you think it represents the true tenets of democracy for a few to determine the fate of a lot?
Well, I don't think with respect that it was not 1/3 that elected then. It was that, I think it was just 1/3 that was present when the process commenced. Because at the time they concluded the voting and election, by the time the voting started, or the time it was concluded, I think they had almost all the members elect on the floor. So it was not 1/3 that elected. And so it doesn't, that does not represent,
just a second,
there is no question of whether it...
Senator Enang, I didn't say it was 1/3. I'm just saying, and I didn't put any fraction to it. I'm just asking whether or not, based on what Honorable Daramala said. And Honorable Daramala, if I can ask you that question again. We've seen the situation in Edo State and a number of other states. There are those who would also cite a previous example in Bauchi State. So if you say you would kick against such a law, saying that we cannot make rules or laws for everything, and you still said in the same breath that laws are meant to prevent certain things, then where exactly do you stand on this issue?
Now, in cases that you have cited, okay, in cases that you have cited, everybody will attest to the fact that they had extraneous influences. You know, we've seen, of course, plethora of that in our democracy. And that's why I started this discussion with the fact that our democracy seems, we celebrate every election cycle and almost make that to be synonymous with advancement. It is not. Our advancement of our democratic practice will be measured in terms of compliance with democratic principles. I'm telling you, and you know it, that in cases where speakers have been impeached and then people have been sworn in with less than a quorum, or done at midnight, or misses in different houses, and one miss retreat from Okija, and all kinds of things like that. We all know that that does not bespeak compliance with democratic principles. So do we have to also say that we have to make laws for how every action of the parliament and the executive and the citizens will be undertaken? It doesn't work like that. Go and check the American Constitution and see how big it is.
Please, let me just make a very brief intervention on this. From what has happened in Edo State and what happened in Rivers State under Governor Amechi as he then was, and the way the House of Assembly was treated in Rivers State under Governor Wike, and the situation in several other states where the legislature has been made like a parastatal, I am of the opinion, and I have made this presentation at intellectual fora, that the question of proclamation by the governor should be readdressed. It should be, because you could have a situation where the governor does not proclaim for the inauguration, because it can't happen at the national level because there is a level of stability, certainty, and precedence. But at different states, when a governor comes in, he behaves as if if he is the beginning of the constitution or beginning of governance, and they act with all kinds of impunity. This question of proclamation should be addressed and made constitutional, so that you know that the assembly will sit for 4 years. And it could be provided that 48 hours later, after the dissolution, automatically the members-elect should be able to convene. I'm glad that the Constitution was amended to give more, to create the House of Assembly Service Commission, and powers given statutorily to the clerks to the House of Assembly of the state, just to cure the kind of situation that the clerks are appointed by the governors and they do what they like. So this proclamation question should be addressed by constitutional experts, so that you do not on its own, that a governor cannot delay the proclamation, because we were involved when we were in the State House of Assembly, so let this situation be changed and made statutory, that 48 hours after, or not less than, if a governor refuses to proclaim and call the inauguration, the members-elect, howsoever, can, at the instance of the clerk to the House of Assembly, convene at the instance of the Council of Assembly and elect their leadership. Because if you don't do that, the kind of mischief, the kind of situation, the kind of abnormality that has happened in Edo State. Edo State is the worst example. The governor is my friend, he's my friend, but what he has done to the legislature is very abnormal, is very bad, very undemocratic, undemocratic, and it should be a study in how not to be a Democrat.
Well, Senator Nang, you may have just taken those thoughts right out of my mind, because I was headed, for your choice of words at the beginning of the commentary when you said that the amendment was to cure the mischief. Alternatively, I'm wondering if the amendment also takes into cognizance the fact that the structure of the legislature is also in the hands of the executive, which is the proclamation letter, and which is the concern raised by my colleague Nyota earlier on, that the assembly is bound by the proclamation issued by the state governor. So in your recommendation about about the need for that proclamation to be addressed, how should it be addressed such that the inauguration of the assembly is not bound by the executive? And we have a test case, or a very recent one, in fact, to refer to in Nasarawa State, where two speakers emerged. And we had the governor on this program tell us that the clerk was communicating with him, and the clerk did not go ahead with the inauguration until he thought that it was safe enough to do so. And in fact, it had to be taken to the old assembly quarters before the inauguration could take place. So we have a case here where the inauguration of 11 members rather than 24 state assembly members were inaugurated. So how should this this proclamation, in the hands of the governor, the executive, be addressed?
Let me add Governor Sule, my friend, the governor of Nasarawa State, to the description and condemnation that I have given to the action of the governor of Edo State. I add him to it. And of course, the inauguration the governor has supervised or superintended in Nasarawa State is condemnable, is illegal, unconstitutional, because you must have the 2/3 present, because the amendment that was done for the National Assembly as to quorum, is the same that was done for the State Houses of Assembly. Let me come to the Nasarawa states and, in fact, other states. Let me take even the case of Akwa Ibom State. Now, Akwa Ibom State, yes, it has been inaugurated, but the governor, the immediate past governor, His Excellency Governor Udom Emmanuel, did something very odd and unconstitutional before he left. He took somebody from the civil service and appointed her as the clerk to the House of Assembly. That is unconstitutional, and I believe and I have asserted that Akwa Ibom State House of Assembly has no clerk, because the Constitution says that the clerk, the law, there is the House of Assembly Service Commission, there is the commission constituted. That clerk ought to be appointed by the House of Assembly Service Commission. The governor and the executive has nothing to do with the appointment of the clerk. The duty and functions of the clerk is to ensure and cause the inauguration, manage the inauguration completely, totally, and absolutely. And so the House of Assembly in Akwa Ibom, like any other house, has a constitutional question. That's number one. The House of Assembly in Nasarawa State is constitutionally faulted because the clerk has no business with the governor. With the greatest respect, I respect my friend, I respect and I appreciate what he's done in terms of development and how he has carried our party away. I mean, how he has carried our party up in terms of his performance and infrastructure. Now, that is Governor Sule. But the way he managed
my apologies,
acted
just
on the assembly
to bring this information to us that proceedings at the National Assembly have already commenced at this time. Of course, if you check your time pieces, you tell it's 17 minutes past 8 a.m. already. Proceedings at the National Assembly have commenced, and of course, as Neota mentioned to you the other time, some were already seeping. Members of the Assembly were already seeping in. Some other government officials were already seeping into the assembly, and that is what you have there. The proclamation has been made. The process has begun, and as the events unfold, we'll bring you updates on the go.
Yes, go ahead, Senator Nangi. We're going to address how the proclamation in the hands of the governor should be renegotiated.
It should be done constitutionally. Not that the power should be removed, but it should be that the proclamation should be within 48 hours after the dissolution of the previous assembly. And if it does not proclaim, it automatically kicks in after 48 hours, and the power vested in the clerk to the House of Assembly. Because the clerk to the House of Assembly is not appointable by the president. By the governor. Is appointable by the House of Assembly Service Commission and is responsible to the legislators. And when the legislature is dissolved, the management of the House of Assembly is in the hand of the clerk to the House of Assembly. And so more powers should be given to the clerk to the House of Assembly to kick in and kick off after the 48 hours if the governor fails to proclaim the convening within 48 hours.
Senator Daramola, Honorable Daramola, yeah. I wonder if you agree with Senator Enang, and if you do not, I'm also looking at, the case where in most state assemblies, they're not on the first line charge, and then they're beholden to the executive as far as, remuneration and all sorts of, welfare allowances are concerned. So in that regard, are we seeing a case where, there's really nothing we can do about it in spite of this amendment to inauguration rules, where we're still going to be having scenarios where, the proclamation has to be made by the state governor, and then we still have, cases where inauguration is done with less than the required quorum for an assembly to be inaugurated?
I think we're beating ourselves up about this just because this is fast becoming a country where anybody in power can exercise it with some level of discretion, not even discretion, arbitrariness, let me say, so instead of dealing with arbitrariness, we're boxed in a situation where we're trying to accommodate the arbitrariness of anybody holding power reins. That's antithetical to democratic practice. Everybody holding the reins and levers of power must bow to what the Constitution prescribes. It's not negotiable. Look at what is happening to Trump today. You understand? In situations where people, and that's why I've spoken to this. The Bible says this, and I'm going to put that clearly. If the foundation be destroyed, what can the righteous do? Let us make sure that everybody, whoever you may be, no matter how, somebody once said that we shouldn't make strong individuals, we should make strong institutions. If our institutions become strong enough, by the duty and the responsibility of the guys that will be inaugurated today, everybody will know that this idea of varying things to suit your purposes We cannot continue to make laws. Okay, if the governor was not wake up from the right side of the bed, we should have a law for that. And all of that. I believe, I'm talking very seriously. And by the way, I think the issue of the autonomy of the state assemblies have been asserted now. And
the fifth amendment to the Constitution has addressed it and given them first-line charge.
So that's been cured, my sister. But today, let me say to you that we cannot bend and kowtow to the arbitrariness of whoever is holding the reins and levers of power.
Okay, all right. Mr. Logbodiyan, as we're winding down now, so please, you make it quick. The party is considered the foundation of all that's happening in the National Assembly. So it's because they came in there on the platform of the party. So what should the party be doing to ensure that this book, the Constitution, which is the Bible of the nation, or the, how do you say, the guiding light of this nation, the grundum. I don't want to use the word grundum, but then, okay, the grundum of the nation is followed through and through.
Well, to be honest with you, I think Bimbo took some words off my heart. The basic thing is that in our country, and under this democratic setting, we are enabling individuals at the expense of the institutions. And in that situation, there's just nothing the parties can do. People have seen, and they have even said, that parties are just platform to contest election. So there are no principles, there are no ideologies, there are no positions of the political parties that are being respected. Once people contest the election and they have won, they forget the platform, they forget the party, they move on into their respective offices or positions of election and do things according to their own whims and caprices. There are people that have been elected today, who are going to be sworn, who are going to be inaugurated today, who will not have any cause to revert back to their political parties. And even if the leadership of parties said, oh, let's go in the direction, they say, oh, no. Your platform, I just use your platform.
Is it because the party is not going in line with what would meet the needs of the people that they were elected to serve?
I don't agree that the parties are not going in line with
are the parties themselves? Do the parties themselves have ideology? Are they an institution?
You will recall that on one occasion we have sat here and we were in Lagos where we spoke to the issue of ideologies. And I said, look, the party's ideologies are basic things. They are known. I'm a member of the People's Democratic Party. I believe that my party stands for democracy. I believe that we stand for social justice. I believe we stand for equity. But there are people in the party who will tell you that, oh, all those ones are just written in the books. Look, the drive to just occupy offices without responsibilities is the bane of this democracy.
Okay.
Sorry, Neta, can I just say something about that?
No, in Winding, that's your last statement. So just to put it this way, given an assignment to the 10th Assembly, what they should be looking at while they're saying what they're saying.
Okay, what I need to say very quickly is the fact that we retrogressed so badly. In the days of UPN and MPN, you're not, who are you?
Exactly.
Not, Shell Shagari couldn't look at Adisa Kinoye in the face.
Yes.
Well, that's things have gone so bad. People are, okay, how many of these political parties have actually given their members, their senators, the kind of training that we got under ACN in Oshobo about our duties? How many of them are really attuned with the philosophy of the party? But anyway, the charge to the guys who will be inaugurated today. Well, Nigeria is looking up to you, and I hope that in another 4 years you'll be able to say not only that you were lucky to have been there, but you've done well for your constituents and by and large for our country. All the best, guys.
Thank you very much. I want to wish the National Assembly, the 10th National Assembly, a very successful and constitutionally and procedurally sound inauguration process. I wish them well.
Thank you so much. We've been speaking with the former Chairman, House of Reps and Senate Committee on Rules and Business, Emeritus Advisor to the President of National Assembly Matters and Gubernatorial Candidate APC Akwa Ibom 2023, Senator Itai Enang. Thank you for coming in. Honorable Kola Ologbodiyan is the immediate past National Policy Secretary of the People's Democratic Party. Thank you for coming here.
Thank you very much.
And Honorable Bimbo Daramola, former member of the House of Representatives, 7th Assembly, former APC Former SDP, now partyless, you say. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen.
You know the ultimate party is the people.
Okay.
So I'm with the people.
With the people.
ACN, he is now APC.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. And we will take a moment and we'll be back. Please do not go away. And right now, bringing an update from what's going on at the National Assembly. The roll call is done by the clerk of the Senate, calling out the names of those present to ensure that everyone's there and they make up to a quorum, as we saw in the Constitution. They make up 2/3 of the members elect. That was done, and then Senator Akpabio was nominated by Senator Ali Ndume for the position of the Senate President. That is what's going on at the moment in the Red Chamber. Right now, this is the Green Chamber, where that's also happening. Apparently, it's happening simultaneously. Roll call nominations for those that will occupy the principal offices in the National Assembly. Yeah, that's a footage from the Senate, from the Red Chamber. Roll call happening. That's the clerk of the House. That's the deputy clerk making the roll call. Then after that, will follow is the nomination of those George nominating Senator Akpabio for the office of the President of the Senate. And while we keep you abreast of what's happening at the National Assembly, it's happening as we speak. Again, we'll bring you updates as they come in. We have joining us virtually the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Right Honorable Yakubu Dogara. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chamberlain.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
This is Neota. Chamberlain is not here today.
Okay, no, thanks.
All right, Honorable Dogara, let's start off with an assessment. You have been former Speaker and you were part of the 9th Assembly. But let's look at, how would you describe the last Assembly, now that the 10th Assembly has been inaugurated? How would you describe the activities and the effectiveness of the 9th Assembly?
Well, I think being a member myself, I don't think it falls within my competence to assess really the effectiveness of the 9th Assembly. But you know that the 9th Assembly came at a trying moment. We had the COVID pandemic, and as it were, it cut short the life of that assembly because for many legislative days, the parliament didn't sit. But all being said and done, I think we have done well. And I'll leave the rest to history makers to judge and then properly put the character of the 9th Assembly in its context.
Okay. In our last guest, we had three guests in the last segment who talked about the activities of the 9th Assembly vis-a-vis going into the 10th Assembly. But one of the things that we looked at was the amendment to the 5th Amendment of the Constitution that affected the National Assembly, and that had to do with the inclusion of a number for the quorum for inauguration and the first sitting. That's one. Number two was about the rule book. It says that the standing orders of the Senate and the House of Representatives, for instance, shall, in existence before its dissolution under Section 64 of the Constitution, shall apply in relation to the proceedings of the first session of the Senate or the House of applies to both chambers of the House of Representatives of the National Assembly and even the State Assembly. Now, in the course of that conversation, we asked why that needed to be, considering also that these are men and women who understand they're coming there to serve the nation? Do they need to have these amendments to the Constitution just for them to be able to function? But one of the guests brought up an issue that happened in 2015. He called it mischief that happened there that saw to the emergence of a member of the opposition being sworn in as principal officer. But in your thinking, was it necessary to have this amendment?
I would say that it's absolutely not necessary. And attempt to re-litigate the events of 2015 as done by Senator Ita, to me is ludicrous, because some of the things he asserted were actually not true. But I think he was a bit redemptive in his approach at last, because he talked about the proclamation of the president. And once the president has made a proclamation, it doesn't matter. That proclamation has to be carried out. So the responsibility for the events of that day fell squarely on the shoulders of those who decided that they were going to take a meeting before moving to the chambers of the National Assembly, in this case the Senate, for the inauguration, when they knew in practical times, to all intent and purposes, that the president has issued a proclamation saying that the Senate must be inaugurated by 10 a.m. So he was trying to blame, I've heard of these conspiracy theories, imaginary roadblocks were set up, mobilization was done, as if something wrong happened that day. He knows very well. He knows, and I know, we have been members of that institution. There is no single inauguration day in history that is not characterized by that kind of traffic. So to me, as far as I'm concerned, it's absolutely not necessary that the Constitution of Nigeria should define every situation, anticipate and define every situation in the Constitution. If you look at the Constitution of the US, for instance, where we borrowed from, it's not more than 14, 15, 16 pages of a document. But look at how voluminous our Constitution is. Everyone who is elected into Parliament should know that he has the obligation to present himself in the chambers by the time of the proclamation that is, embedded in the proclamation by the president. And in this case, senators-elect decided to go and take a meeting outside the parliament before they move in. So movement into and out of parliament on inauguration day, since the days I became member, have always been very tough. There were instances where we had to disembark from our buses in order to trek into the chambers. He knows that. So there was no imaginary roadblocks. The question was that some decided that it was more important for them to go for a side meeting instead of honoring the time that was embedded in the proclamation of Mr. President. And you may want to ask yourself, how did the Saraki faction get into the chambers? How? Did they drop from the sky? So it means that if all the senators really wanted to be in the chambers by 10 a.m. on that day, they would have been there. So the rules of the House are there, the rules of the Senate are there, and they define virtually everything that should transpire. And every legislator elect, goes through a process of induction, whereby they are taught the basics of the rules, and then they are taught about the inauguration and virtually everything before this day. There's always a training for members, and they are told the necessity or the importance of getting yourself into the chambers before proceedings begin. So having said that, if we were to define every situation, every mischief that happens and provide for it under the Constitution, at the end of the day, the whole of this space called Nigeria may not even be able to take the volume of document that the Constitution will transmutate into.
You've talked about the fact that they or what happened on that day, people choosing to have a meeting, but let's tie it to what we had, the last part of the conversation we had here, where we talked about the party's position in the course of legislative duties, for instance. When the party, for instance, calls for a meeting and you have to be somewhere, which takes precedent. And in this case here now, on that in 2015, it was supposed to be a meeting called for by the party. So you expected these lawmakers not to heed to the call of their party?
No, okay. When you have a meeting summoned by the party and then a proclamation of the president on the inauguration of the National Assembly, which one to a rational mind will take precedent over the other? You should know very well that the proclamation of the president has to be obeyed. It's a constitutional proclamation. And there's nothing in the meeting of the party that is supported by the Constitution. Except we are bedwetting Democrats, we should know that measures adopted in sync with the provision of the Constitution take precedence above every other thing, every other consideration, whether it's a party meeting, it is a party caucus meeting, whatever it is, because it's not supported by the Constitution.
So clarify this for us and for those who might be watching, because there's those who also argue that the members it's actually the party, following precedence, it's the party that is elected into office, not the individual. And then they'll tell you that when you go into any of these elected offices, the party is supreme. So you listen to the instructions of the party leadership, contrary sometimes to what the Constitution has called your duties as a member of any constituted authority. So at that point in time, for instance, the 10th Assembly has just been inaugurated. They are going in there. A mandate had been given, for instance, nominating a couple of people for principal offices. And there has been that build-up to this day, even to the point where we see adverts in public spaces and newspapers asking people to vote, so to speak, knowing that the public can't even go in there to vote. So at what point do we draw the line? At what point should the legislature or the politician draw the line between service to the people and service, in quote, to the party?
Well, you will very well know that the essence of democracy is that we shouldn't be ruled by the personal whims of powerful people, whether they're in the judiciary, whether they're in the executive, or whether they're in political parties. And the political party leadership knows very well that even the party itself, it's embedded in consideration in some legislative instruments that are enacted pursuant to provision of the Constitution. So the party itself is subject to the Constitution. And you see, we have to be reasonable in our consideration. We ran into a situation where the president has issued a proclamation, and then to all intent and purposes, the party now calls a meeting in a manner that will violate the proclamation issued by Mr. President. So when you run to this kind of situation, what you do is for you to obey the law, because we are ruled by laws, not by the personal whims of anybody. And if the party sincerely wanted to do anything, it should have been done outside the timing embedded in the proclamation issued by the president. And let me say this, why is it that the executive is always interested in who becomes the presiding officer in either houses of the National Assembly? Why? Why? Because if we have statesmen, someone has said that a statesman is a politician who places himself at the service of the nation, while a politician is a statesman who places the nation at his services. We all know that, to all intent and purposes, the essence of democracy is to save us from tyranny. But why should we seek the combination of executive, legislative, and judicial powers in the hands of one individual or in the hands of a branch of government? Why? If it is the service of the people we truly intend to do. And it's been said that democracies die in 3 stages: the election of an authoritarian leader, the concentration of the powers of government, and then the complete repression of opposition and the citizens. Any democracy, I dare say this, any democracy that cuts itself off from checks and balances severs its lifeline. It is condemned to bleed to death. And the problem has been that whether it is governors or executive at the federal level, they want to exercise legislative and judicial powers through entrenched practice in this institution. I think we shouldn't be looking at even the rules of the House or conduct of legislators. We should be looking at the executive and place the blame where it properly belongs. Why should someone who has been elected into executive positions seek to control the emergence of leadership of a parliament that is supposed to be independent? And I must say this, once you don't have an independent parliament, it is democracy in recession. The parliamentary work itself, legislative work, becomes stultifyingly boring. Progress is stymied, and the work of the people is not done. People think disagreement, equates with treason. But you see, the entire enterprise called democracy is built around the notion that we should be driven by consensus. There has to be executive, legislative, and in some cases, judicial consensus for us to move forward. Without disagreement, there can't be progress.
So Honorable Dogara, you see,
we're using today.
You asked a question earlier, if I may come in here, you asked a question earlier about why it looks as if those in the executives want to somewhat control what happens in the legislature. But then the legislature, going by the Constitution here, is empowered to oversight what goes on in the executive, so to speak, not just enacting laws. Okay, one, enact laws. The other duty of the legislature is what? To do oversight. Does the executive control how the legislature does its oversight? Should that be the situation?
No. Let me tell you this. The essence of trying to interfere in the process of emergence of the leadership, especially the presiding officers, is for those in the executive position to control or exercise all these legislative powers that you are talking about, whether it is the lawmaking, whether it is in the aspect of oversight. They want to be able to say, these are our boys, we put them there, so they should do our bidding. And that is why I said, once you have a compromised parliament, once you have a parliament that is not fiercely independent, it cannot do the job of democracy. It cannot do the job of the people. The reason simply being that even if I were to be the president, I know that I'm appointed to be the leader of parliament by Mr. President. And you don't know what we pass through. There are times you are sitting on the dais as speaker, there are phone calls coming. Sometimes they want you to talk to people outside. So you can imagine, if you have been elected based on the intervention of these individuals, what will you do? Would you be able to receive their phone calls, look them in the eyes and say, no, I'm not going to do it? But where you have parliaments solely in charge of determining who becomes their leader or presiding officers, that freedom is always there to look at issues before them, apply their conscience to it, apply their wisdom to it, and take decisions that are in the best interest of the nation. But where you are put there, the saying becomes very true, that he who pays the piper dictates the tune. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't know the fears exercised by the executive, such that they are always driven to want to control the parliament, to put people there, to exercise legislative authority through the hands of...
Honorable Dogara, if you don't mind, my colleagues in Lagos would come in here. They have some questions, but just before they do that, let's just give this update. Senator Ishaku Abu has also nominated Senator Abdulaziz Yari as Senate President. The nomination of Senator Yari is followed by a point of order raised to counter the nomination, but senators raised voice is claiming a point of order is not admissible in this case, though the point of order was raised due to Senator Yari not being a ranking member of the Red Chamber. The clerk has declared nominations closed. In absence of further nominations, the contest will be between Senator Godswill Akpabio and Senator Abdulaziz Yari. 109 senators are present in the chamber, and they are present to do their votes. But over to you, Ayo Ambuki.
Thank you, Nyota. Interesting. Democracies in action already on the floor of the National Assembly. Senator Dogara, anyone who listens to you, I imagine, may not particularly express surprise, given that your election has been repeatedly cited ahead of the debate, trailing the inauguration of this 10th Assembly, has been one that pulled the, rug beneath the feet of the political party that chose another candidate, i.e. the election of former speaker, also a former governor, now Senator-elect Aminu Tambuwal, as doing pretty much the same. In the light of that, I wonder if that legacy, what do you see happening? Will that legacy be played out, during the inauguration today? And if it will not be played out, what do you think about the fact that the preponderance of members-elect in this 10th Assembly being first-timers? How will it affect, the pressure from the political party to have their way in terms of the election of key officers into the National Assembly?
Well, I missed the first part of your statement, but I believe I understand the issues raised and I should be able to address them. Well, for me, honestly speaking, I don't see a repeat of those. I don't see a repeat of those scenarios emerging as you alluded to. And honestly speaking, without sounding a bit pessimistic, I want to believe, I hope I'm wrong, but I believe that the days of standing up to tyranny in the legislature have long faded. There's no road to Damascus moment here. I think salvation or redemption is very far. But whether we like it or not, I don't know. Like I raised the question, why will the executive always be interested in picking who presides over either of the chambers of the National Assembly? In most cases, as legislators, most especially some of us who have stayed there for long, we know those who have the onions, we know those we trust, we know those we believe, we know those that have the capacity, to exercise leadership on our behalf. But when it comes to determining this, whether it is from the point of view of the executive or the political parties, in most cases, what they do is just to sit down there without proper consultation with the membership and say, no, this person must be the presiding officer based on their own completely, extrinsic consideration without regard, to the feeling of members. But I believe that in the future, except we're able to curb these excesses, we must come to a position whereby political parties, like we say caucuses in the National Assembly, produce leaders, such as we have in the US. So it should be taken for granted that once that party forms majority in the House, the person who is the caucus leader of that political party becomes the Speaker or the Senate President. That way, I think we'll be able to deal with all these issues. But I don't see the scenario of the Tambuwal scenario or my own scenario emerging at all.
Well, perhaps it also speaks to one of the scenarios that also came up earlier. Now, you've spoken about the party as well quite a few times here. Someone raised earlier in our conversation that in the Second Republic, the party supremacy was very, very strong. Do you see such a thing coming back up again in a situation where the leadership of any political party who is in power, their manifesto, the policies, the interests of the party, what the party wants to do for the nation, for the people that employed them, comes supreme even to the members of that party, including the president or the governor of the state, wherever it is that governor is governing? Do you see that happening, where party supremacy plays a significant role in governance?
Just like I've said in the case of the legislature, I don't see it happening at the level of the political parties either. It's unfortunate. The reason why parties were supreme in those days is attributable to the emergence of the leadership of the political parties. My friend, my very good friend and brother, Honorable Bimbo, raises the question of in the days of NPM and others. You know, there was no much interference in the emergence of the party leadership. But if you look at the political parties today, how did the leadership emerge? If you ask yourself that question. So if a president is in a position to pick the leaders, the entire leadership of a political party, and the maxim I've quoted earlier on is saying that he who pays the piper dictates the tune is always there. So the chairman of the party is beholden to the president. He's almost running to the villa.
Which
you
also begs the question, my apologies, Right Honorable Dogara, which also begs the question, at the end of the day, isn't it the responsibility of the political parties, the politicians themselves, to play the game according to how it ought to be played, as opposed to playing the politics of interests? Personal interests in most cases.
I totally agree with you. And I think that is the point I'm trying to make, that we must act in the overall interest of the nation and the stability of our democracy. But in most cases where, you know, we are going for favors, you know, taking the position we're advocating requires resistance. Now, resistance is not about comfort. It entails suffering and sacrifice. And when you resist, you tend to lose a lot. And a lot of people are not in a position to do that, to exercise their powers to resist. So in most cases, they try to read, even if the president is not saying anything. You are in a meeting and people are saying, oh, we are reading the body language of the president. So they are trying to move towards, you know, the suggestion of his body language, even before he has said anything. Why? Because they don't want to be cut off from favors. So that is the problem. It's our problem. It's the problem of the political class. But if we're able to say, look, Mr. President, allow the leadership of our political party to emerge naturally. Let them, if zoning is okay, because I believe in inclusivity, but we don't zone to an individual. Allow individuals, tested politicians in that zone where that office has been zoned to contest. And then let it be that they emerge from the evolution of members of the political party. But in most cases, without consent, once the president said it's A, the A is elected, or he becomes, you know, the leader of the political party. And in that, you know, it's this independence of the party that suffers. They will continue to operate under the suzerainty of the executive or president, or whoever nominated them into those positions. There's nothing we're going to do about that. It cannot change. He who pays.
Very much. Thank you very much. Right Honorable Yakubu Dogara, former Speaker of the House of Representatives. Thank you for coming on the show this morning and for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much. Welcome. God bless.
And that's the show today. I want to thank you for letting us be a part of your morning. I'm Neota Igbe.
Yes, indeed. We'll keep our eyes on the inauguration process for you and bring you updates as they emerge. Thank you very much for being a part of the program today and for allowing us to share your morning. I am Bukola Koka.
Live updates right now on channelstv.com. That's the first thing you see when you get to that website, channelstv.com. Live updates of what's happening in the National Assembly, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. The Speaker and the Senate, President of the Senate will emerge today. I'm Ayo Makinde. Have a wonderful rest of your day.